I'm Laura Knights, CEO of Knights Consulting, creator of BlackWomanLeading.com, and the host of Black Woman Leading, the podcast. This podcast amplifies the needs and experiences of Black women leaders in the workplace with a holistic focus on 3 core areas: leadership development, mental wellness, and relationship management. Our ultimate aim is to help Black women learn, heal, and grow in their leadership capacity. Hey, so I am back for a solo episode today, and we're talking about navigating change. Now, this whole season, we've been focused on driving the narrative of your career, and this requires some self-awareness, which is how we see our own selves, values, passions, aspirations fit with our environment, reactions, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, all of that, and the impact of those things on others. And so a big part of our context as leaders is how we navigate change and disruption. And so we want to talk about that. I like this quote: to fight change is to fight nature, and nature always wins. Okay. And so we are in this time where things are changing so quickly, right? On all levels. And it's easy to be consumed or overwhelmed by this change that's inevitable and necessary for growth. And it's happening on our teams and our companies and our personal lives in society. So as leaders, we must be able to adapt to succeed in this ever-changing landscape, right? From a strategic point as leaders, we want to keep our ears perked to the environments we're in so we can be prepared to respond. But at a kind of personal level, change can be hard, y'all. It can be really hard. And so when we think about this environment of disruption, of change, disruption is about no more business as usual. You know, what was yesterday is different today. This could be positive. This could be negative. But this is in all areas of our lives. I mean, even if we think about just in the professional landscape, right? I was reading an article the other day, or a post that linked an article the other day on LinkedIn, and it was talking about the unemployment rates of Black women have increased significantly, more than a lot of the other groups. And we know the stats about a lot of Black women being the most educated group, right? The article was pointing to a number of things to account for this. Some of it was this shift in maybe the corporate or the organizational landscape in this kind of anti-DEI with the new administration, and how a lot of those DEI roles were being held by Black women. We know a lot of Black women in our BWL community, and also in my personal network, that have been impacted by those DEI rollbacks. But it also talked about like a lot of impact on industries like retail and other service-oriented professions that a lot of Black women hold those roles. So we're seeing a lot of change in that environment, right? We can think about the explosion, not new, but amplified explosion in like the digital space with AI and all of this in the last couple of years, right? So many different business or work related changes we can just think about as at a broad level, right? This doesn't even touch on what's happening inside of your particular organization. And then we can come to our personal life, right? You can think about family changes, health concerns, biological changes, hello, perimenopause and menopause, right? Caretaking responsibilities, if you're caring for elders while you're caring for children. So many changes in our personal life, y'all. So we can't really escape this stuff. For some people, they are more able to pivot and adapt easier. For other people, change is really hard, right? So if this is coming at us from all different angles as leaders, we want to think about, how do we manage this? How do we navigate and adapt so that we aren't taken over, we aren't consumed or overwhelmed by these multiple changes that we're having to navigate? And that's what we want to talk about today. Now, there's change, right, at all different levels, as I just hinted at. Change and disruption. No more business as usual. We come in today and tomorrow it's a different thing, right? There's the macro level. We can think of that as, the politics that's happening, the global stuff that's happening. We can think about that as environmental stuff that's happening. And, leadership literature will often talk about these macro changes as VUCA, if you've ever heard of that acronym. And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So all of these changes are happening under those kind of conditions. We can think about meso layer, what's happening in our organizations, restructures, layoffs, mergers, shifts in the focus, shifts in the mission, all of these kind of things. And then we come down to us at the micro level. And that's how are we dealing with all of this stuff? So a lot of times when we think about in professional development environments and we talk about change, we're often talking about the change event. And there's two kind of simultaneous levels happening when we talk about this change and disruption. There's the event level. So there's something that has happened. And I just referenced a few things, right? The merger of the team, new leadership, restructure. If we think about a workplace context, right? That's an event that has occurred external to us that we can point to and say, hey, this change has occurred. You can even think about, change in policies, change in ways of working, a work process, workflow, all of these things. That's a change event. And oftentimes when we're in these professional development or leadership development spaces, the literature is talking about the change event, meaning how do we structure the communication to let people know what's happening? How do we build these kind of alliances and coalitions to drive the change forward? It's a change management process, right? And that's important. We need to do that from an organizational standpoint. But what I want to talk about today is the other lane that's happening at the same time. So change event, external thing. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to communicate about it? How are we going to manage the different stakeholders around it? But then the other piece is this internal, emotional, human piece of the change. And that's what's happening inside of people. So change event, all the things we're doing to manage the change, but inside of people, the personal, emotional level, there's also a change process happening in how people are taking in that change, adapting to that change, accepting that change, rejecting that change, supporting the change, sabotaging the change, all of those kind of things. And I want to talk about it at the micro level because we have a diverse audience that listens to this podcast. You may be a leader, and I'm going to give you some tips later. If you're a leader that has the capacity to influence how people are navigating change at the the organizational level, right? There's some tips for you. But everybody who's listening, whether you are a quote unquote leader with positional power, formal leader or not, everybody has that personal micro internal emotional process of dealing with change. And so that's what I want to zoom in today and think about, give you a space to think about, how are you navigating change? How do you navigate change? Is it difficult for you? Is it refreshing for you? Is it overwhelming for you? Again, a self-awareness point, which is critical for you as a leader, for your growth and for your development. How are you navigating change, and what might be some tips to help you navigate change? If you are a leader of others, we can add a layer in of how might you support the others that you have to manage and coach through change. So that's what we are talking about today. And I hope to give you a couple of tips to help you think about that and situate yourself in this topic. So a couple of things about how we personally manage change is a broad frame we want to keep around is that, spending some time on this and reflecting on this is building our learning agility, our growth mindset, and our resilience as leaders. And learning agility is simply the ability to learn and adapt quickly to new situations, challenges, and experiences. And it's about your capacity to apply lessons learned from one situation to another, to recognize patterns, apply them to new problems, and then to effectively navigate unfamiliar or complex situations. And so with any change, right, there is significant impact, not only on the external stuff, the business functions, the team, the process, but also the emotional level can wreak havoc, right, if we're not really managing that. So I want to share a couple of models that can help you think about this, right? But just to pause a bit on that learning agility before we start to go into some models that's out there to help us think about how we are personally navigating change. So that learning agility definition I gave is about, you have been through stuff before, right? And if you have been following our podcast for any amount of time, you know, when we talk about experience, when we talk about value you bring, we're not just talking about your education and your resume and your degrees. We're talking about your life experience as a Black woman that you bring to bear. You have been navigating change for most of your life. You have been navigating disruption as a Black woman, probably for a lot of your life, whether personal, at work, or societal, right? As we think about that. And so as we think about how we're navigating change, I want you to think about, what are those resources that you have been able, internal resources that you have been able to develop from all of those different changes in your life, and how that can support you to navigate not only the current personal change you might be dealing with, but the professional change as well. I mean, one of the things that I think has given me a considerable amount of strength, although it was really difficult for me, was supporting my father in the last stages of his life. Last 6 months of his life, my father was really isolated, self-choosing to isolate himself. He was dealing with a number of mental and physical health challenges. And so I became someone that he would allow to assist him, right? And during that period of time, if you've ever been a caretaker for an elder, you know kind of what that stress, especially if they're really sick, what that stress can do. It's a privilege and an honor to be there and to support, but it's a lot to manage when you are also trying to manage your own life and everything you have to do. You might be parenting, you might be working, you might be trying to build a relationship with your partner, all of these kind of things. And in that particular season of my life, I had a toddler. I had a marriage that was still developing and getting on strong footing. I had a career that was growing as a leader, and just trying to find my own self as a woman who was growing and evolving. And I think about that season of my life of supporting my father through the last stages of his life, which was a very emotional time. It was a very taxing time. It was a very stressful time. But the lessons that I got from that, you all, from the resilience, from the heartache, really, and having to heal and recover from that, from navigating all of the logistical stuff, his affairs, his, medical support, being the linkage back to the family who was equally concerned about him, but he was putting up, barriers. I think about all of that, and although that's a deeply personal experience, it is so much of that that had fortified my ability to deal with change and disruption. I mean, it took me a long time to recover from that, after my physically and emotionally, after my father made his transition. But when I think about some of the fears that dissipated in me, I mean, it was almost like, baby, if you could do this, you could do anything. In some ways, in some areas of my life, that experience with my father really made me fearless, right? Not across the board. Definitely still got fear, but key aspects of my life, things that I wanted to do that I was holding back on because I wasn't sure. When I emerged from that thing, I was like, okay, yeah, I can do this. I've dealt with this before. I've dealt with some real serious stuff before. I can definitely do this. So I just want to impress upon you, because somebody might be watching or listening who is really going through a change, and that thing is turning you every which way but loose. Okay. I want you to pull on your life experience, because that's what learning agility is about. You may not have seen this scenario before, girlfriend, but you've seen some other stuff, and you've got some transferable skills internally and externally that can help you to navigate this. So that when we're talking about learning agility, when we're talking about resilience, that's what we're talking about. How you have bounce back in other areas, not without consequence. Because sometimes resilience is used as like, sometimes resilience is you scraping yourself through, right? We gonna call a thing, but you have some things that you can deal with that you can apply, that you can pull from, some resources you can pull from if you're in a change now and that thing is rough for you. So I just want to speak that to you, right? Before we start talking about some tactical stuff, because you got some things, some wisdom, some intuition, some things already that you can pull from. Okay. So since we're focused on this micro level, I want you to right now just take a reflection point and think about honestly, how do you deal with change? Is it comfortable for you? Are you initially resistant and it takes you a while? Are you excited about change? You like the spontaneity. You like to switch it up. So you like, yes, bring it on. Even if it's challenge, I welcome it. It's important to notice about yourself. There's no right or wrong to it. There's no judgment to it. But it's important to know this from a self-awareness point to yourself, because you might have to build in some extra supports. If change is hard for you and you are walking into a scenario where maybe some major organizational change, or you're going through a transition, or you need to pivot, you need to move to another organization, you've gotten laid off and you need to figure out a next thing, and that being out of your routine and your predictability wears you out, then you need to be proactive, not only about your self-care, but also for the resources and support network you need to tap into, but also the boundaries you might need to set in this season while you are navigating what might be difficult for you. Now, if change is your jam, baby, and you love that, and you like the spontaneity, and you like the switch up, then that's great too. You can lean into that, but still acknowledging that even changes that are good can sometimes have some difficult moments for us, right? And we want to not be caught off guard, sucker punched, if you will. We don't want to be sucker punched. We want to be aware and be able to go into this thing with a plan. So let's talk about some models that are out there that we can use to think about change and how we navigate and what we might do as we're moving through this. But before we look into those models, I just want to acknowledge that uh, it should be expected that there will be some resistance to change. I mean, if we think about just how human beings are created, right? Um, we're created to prioritize our own survival. We are created to look for ways to protect ourselves, right? And so comfort feels good, predictability feels good. So we should expect resistance internally, but also from others, right? When we are experiencing change. And so I just want to put that out there. Let's normalize that. That's part of human nature. If you are rolling out a change and people are giving you a hard time as resistance, it is part of human nature. And so we should expect it, but we should also respect resistance, because that means that there's some value there for people. Now we need to navigate it, but we should expect it and we should respect it. And I'll talk a little bit more about resistance and navigating resistance in just a second. Now, there are tons of change models, but one that's common and that I like to talk about for the personal navigation of change is the Kubler-Ross change curve. And when I first learned about the Kubler-Ross change curve, it was actually when I was being trained as a therapist, because it's the exact same model for the 5 stages of grief. And so over time, this model has been adapted to like the business environment. And it illustrates the normal phases people go through when experiencing change. And you may have heard of this as grief. Normally, when we think about the grief, we think about death and bereavement, right? But not at the same level of intensity, of course, but those emotions we go through when we're experiencing bereavement are the same emotions that we mimic when we experience change. Different intensities, of course, but the same emotions. And so, in just thinking about that curve, I'll just hit really quickly the different stages. And I want to, as I'm going through those stages, I want you to think about a current change you're navigating. It could be personal or professional. And as I go through the stages real quick, I want you to think about where you are. If you're leading a team, maybe think about where some of your people are as you all are navigating an organizational change together. So one of the common phases, of course, is shock and disbelief, right? And that could be head in the sand. It's the surprise or shock or the denial, the disorientation about the change. What does that look like, right? We might have a sense of what that looks like in a really severe or critical circumstance, like we don't believe that someone that we love has died, maybe. But right, if we're thinking about in an organizational context, sometimes that just looks like not really acknowledging the change. I've seen this from a more surface level adaptation. Like I remember being at an organization and they did a rebrand and people didn't like the rebrand. They didn't think it really represented the vibe. And it was a disconnect in kind of the higher ups selecting this and not really getting a lot of insight from the people that were doing the work. So they had an attitude kind of about it, like this ugly stuff. Why are they redoing this, right? And it was clear directives. I was a manager at the time. It was clear directives that effective immediately. We were using the new letterhead, the new kind of templates for the visuals and the flyers with this new branding. And people were still using the old stuff. People were still using the old stuff, girl. Right? They were like, nah, I don't like that. It's ugly. I mean, to the point where we were in the managers meeting and they were like, okay, y'all need to tell y'all people if they still using that old stuff and they still sending that to clients, like this is going to become a performance issue. And it had to go that deep because people didn't like it. So that shock and disbelief could be like, whatever, that ain't real. It could look like that, right? It could look like a disorientation. I think about some of our corporate clients that do digital transformation and maybe integrating new enterprise-wide software and things of the sort. And, there's a resistance sometimes to people coming over to that new software, right? Maybe they were using Excel or something before, an Excel spreadsheet and doing stuff manually. And now there's this new fancy software that's going to do it and automate things. And you would think, oh, that sounds like it's going to create more efficiency and effectiveness, which is why organizations implement this stuff. But there's people that are resistant to that and they are in that like frustration, denial, kind of disorientation about it. And so what could that be about if we're talking about the internal piece, right? It can be about a number of things. It could be about ego. It could be about I was the expert on the Excel spreadsheet and now there's a learning curve and I'm at the same spot as all the juniors because we learning it together and I got some esteem for being the Excel master over here, right? It could be all kinds of things. So shock, that disbelief, the denial piece of refusing to fully engage with the change can be a stage here. Okay. We can also see like this anger, frustration, fear, negotiation phase, right? And that is like a desire to hold on to some of the status quo because change is uncomfortable or because I know what it's going to cost me, like the learning curve to learn all this new stuff or if there's some ego or things like that, if there's some prestige I'm going to lose, right? And so sometimes we see in this negotiation, this frustration phase, we see a lot of people doing things like, well, do we have to change the whole thing? What if we just change this part? What if we just change this part? So there's a negotiation, trying to keep some piece of the status quo. You'll see that coming up. Then there's a stage that the model refers to as depression. And so, of course, if we're talking about bereavement, grief, that makes sense, but that might sound severe, right? A little too heavy if we're thinking about regular workplace changes. But depression doesn't necessarily have to be an emotional depression. It could be that, but it could also be like a depression of productivity because of the change and the need to learn things or the need to kind of get our mindset on a new thing. Maybe the rate of things getting done, our effectiveness, our productivity, our efficiency may go down. That's appropriate for the depression model in the workplace. We'll sometimes too see morale go down. I remember when I was a leader in another organization before starting Nice Consulting, we had a series of just back to back to back hits that really put the organization, the people, the individual humans in a depression mode. We had two deaths back to back, one of a dear colleague and one of a leader within a few months of each other. They were both beloved people and they were both a surprise. and it just hit us like hard, right? That's a severe example, but the depression was the morale. People were really grieving, and we don't want to do work because the person who was our comedic relief is gone, right? We've also seen major organizational change, mergers, shifts, reorgs, and people fearful that that part of the business had a layoff. Maybe my part is next, even if you're being told your part is not next. That can cause a morale issue. Maybe there has been some poor engagement with leadership and the team. And that can cause morale issues. So there's this dip in this piece. And that's where we might see morale down, productivity down. It's a space where people might be needing to learn the new way. And it may not be an emotional morale down. It may just be the productivity down because we need time to learn the new thing. And so things have just slowed a bit. Then we start to get up into the acceptance point, which is a decision point, right? That people then choose to engage with the change. Sometimes it's begrudgingly. Sometimes it's, well, if this is what we're doing, I guess I got to do it. Other times it's like, okay, I see the value of this, even if it was a difficult kind of push there. I see the value of it, right? So once we get there, what are some of the things that helps adults get to that decision point? What are some of the things that help us to get there? So what are the things that help us get there? And this might be something that supports you or helps you to support others. What we know is that one, people really understand the change and the why of it, right? What it means for them on a personal level. Sometimes leaders roll out change, or you in your personal life, maybe rolling out a change to your children or your family. And we think if we only focus on the personal, on the positive part, we only focus on the positive part, then that'll help everybody to come along. And the fact of the matter is that people are in their minds already counting the cost. And when we don't acknowledge those costs up front, it can actually cause a barrier to people hitting that decision point of acceptance. So what helps people to get there? One, really understanding the change and the why of it. Like, why are we doing this? What's the benefit? What's the value? How is this going to make things better? But a true acknowledgement of what this means for me on a personal level. And think about it in the workplace context. Maybe you are, a change has been handed down to you and you got to communicate it to other people. Acknowledging, yeah, y'all, this is going to be a heavy lift. Yes, this is going to take us some time. Yes, this may slow us down a little bit until we get the hang of it, but then we're going to come up. Acknowledging the cost as well as the benefit is going to support people to get to that acceptance quicker than just acting like it's no cost, acting like there's no downside to this, right? And having those pieces, the why, the understanding, knowing what it means for me on a personal level, and then people knowing they have a choice to do with that, what to do with that, can help people get to that decision point a little bit more quickly. And then finally, the last part is really about integration, that, once we've had some time to really understand the change, maybe ask some questions about the change. If there's some learning curve, do some learning, some training, some skill building around the change. Deal with our frustration, our fear, our grief around the change. Then people can really move into this new normal. After a while, the change is not a new thing. They call that integration. Now, does everyone go through all of the stages of this curve? No. Some people, you announce the change, they go immediately to acceptance and integration. It's depending on what that meant for them on a personal level, how much control they had around it, how much it was going to impact them. It wasn't a big deal. It's like, it is what it is. We doing this. Okay, what we got to do. But sometimes people don't ever get to acceptance, y'all. They stay in that frustration. They stay being resistant. And sometimes those people stay and they become a thorn in the side, and other times they end up exiting, either themselves or the company exits them because they can't get with the program, right? You think about in your personal life, you probably got some people that just could not ever get with the change, and they are a little disgruntled, right? And you find a way to navigate them. So everybody doesn't get through. Everybody is at a different path. What I want you to think about is, where are you on it. If you have a change you're navigating personally or professionally, you think about some of those different pieces, and you can Google the change curve. It's a very popular, been around for decades, very popular framework if you need a visual to look at it. But think about, where are you on this curve with the change you might be navigating? If you're leading a team that's navigating a change, where are they on this curve? Can you plot them on the curve and think about kind of where people are, how we might support them through it? And I'll give you a couple of points on that. But first, I talked about resistance earlier. Let's come back to resistance, and then we can talk a little bit about, how do we support people through these different stages of the change as far as the internal micro emotional piece of it. That's what we're focused on in this episode. Now, let's talk about this resistance, honey. I said you should expect it and you should respect it, because it is part of our human nature to try to survive, to try to grasp onto something that we know, that's predictable, that is safe, right? So humans gonna human, right? Humans gonna human. But let's say you are on the other side of that resistance and you need to get people to accept this change. Okay, you are putting the change out. You want people to accept the change. One of the things that I encourage people to do in like our coaching work and our training work in organizations is to kind of see what is under the resistance. Now, that's easier said than done. It requires some empathy, because some people cut the fool with the resistance, okay? And think about, what are your resistance behaviors? When you don't like a change, how do you act? What does it look like? I'll give you one of mine. One of mine is procrastination. I just hold out on it until I absolutely have to deal with it, right? Other people might show some aggression to it. Other people might do some blaming, right? Other people might simply ignore it. I was talking to a leader the other day, and he was talking about a change that they rolled out, and he was following up in the team's chat after the meeting for his team, where he rolled out the change. He said people were not very vocal about it, but he can pick up the energy, the vibe in the room, the body language, that people didn't like it. And so he says his team's chat is basically so chatty. There's memes in there. There's jokes in there. The team has a good rapport. And he did a follow-up about that change he rolled out. He said it was silent in there for almost like a day. And he said literally how the normal process is, you will not even hit submit on a message and people will immediately be responding. He said it was crickets in there, right? That was resistance to change, silence, moving away, avoidance, procrastination, aggression, all of these things. So think about, what are your resistance behaviors? You have them. When you don't like a change, how do you show up? Okay. So we all have the resistance behaviors, but as leaders, I'm talking on the side of you're trying to get someone to go with you with the change, right? As leaders, what we're trying to do is not get lost in the resistance behavior. We may have to address it, right? If you're expecting a response, you may have to address it. But it's to see if you can go beneath the surface to see what is underneath the resistance. Sometimes you might be able to observe and pull that. Other times you might need to ask explicitly, because what I have found in dealing with resistance is that it is usually a flip side of the coin under there that people are navigating. They are either navigating a fear that there will be a loss, a fear of something that they won't be able to manage, or they think they won't be able to manage. It's the flip side of the same coin. It just depends on how people frame it. So this fear is underneath here, something I'm going to lose. The flip side of that is something I deeply desire that I won't be able to get, right? And that is usually underneath resistance. I'm telling you, if you pause and think about the last change that you show resistance to, and if you really sit with yourself and say, what was underneath that? Why was I objecting to that? Why was I hesitant to accept it? What was I fearful to lose? Or what was I scared that I wouldn't be able to obtain? You usually can find yourself underneath that in the resistance. So our job as leaders, especially if we are facilitating change, is to see, can we pull that out underneath? Can we see what is the um, the fear, right? And speak to the fear, address that, or the desire, the unrealized desire that is also a fear, a different type of fear, right? And see if we can speak to that. But the resistance, we should expect it. Don't get an attitude when people are resistant. That you should expect it. Humans are gonna human. But how can you not just get lost in the, oh, she was sitting there with her arms folded, so you can't move past it? That's how she's showing resistance. What can we do to go underneath and see what's underneath that? Okay. Another quick model that might be useful to conceptualize this is called the Bridges transition model. And it talks about similar to this kind of this grief, this letting go, but it just breaks it into three categories. There's an ending phase that is difficult, that has some grief, some hard to let go, some hard to accept. There is this neutral zone in which people are, it's like a liminal zone or transition zone. People are like 1 foot in the old way, 1 foot in the new way, and still trying to get their bearings. They're still trying to learn. They're still trying to figure it out. And so this is where there's the learning curve. This is an opportunity for experimentation and learning, giving information, growth, coaching to help people move through. If you are going through something personally, this is where your therapist, your counselor, your spiritual work might be very supportive in helping you to get some footing because you feel untethered in the neutral zone, like you're floating in the air and you need to be grounded. So it is this kind of uncertain space. And then the third phase in the transitions model is new beginning. So it's similar to that integration we talked about in the curve, where I'm letting go of something. It's difficult for me. There might be some grief there. This neutral zone, what the heck is going on? I got to find my footing. I got to find my grounding. And then the new beginning, I'm moving into acceptance and integration. So different ways you can think about it. But I give you this because when we have language for what we're experiencing or what others are experiencing, it's easier for us to try to do something with it, do something about it. Okay. So we've talked about what could be happening emotionally through these changes we're navigating. Now let's think about how we can support ourselves or others through those stages. So I'll give you a couple of tips and hopefully that will give you some insight into maybe what you can do now as you're navigating change, if you're navigating change. So back to the change curve. Let's talk about in that shock disbelief phase. What you're doing here is you're listening, you're asking and you're answering questions. You're giving information, educating, and giving people time to adapt and understand the why of the change. Remember, that was needed to get to the decision point. And as much as possible, you're trying to release information gradually, right? So you're not overwhelming people with all of the information. Remember, we're trying to help people understand the why, so that they can move toward that decision point. Now, let's say this anger, frustration, irritation phase. We want to think about how to address objections proactively. If you're the one experiencing that, you want to ask those questions. You want to see if there's opportunity for you to share your concerns and get some feedback. Now, when we get to that bargaining, remember that negotiation and trying to keep the piece of the status quo. What could we, do we have to change the whole thing? That thing. This is actually a good place to explore, test, and experiment. Sometimes changes, are rolled out, and when you get some of that resistance, it's because the people who are giving the resistance actually have a different vantage point. And it might be some good ideas they have in there. So if it's possible, right, it depends on what the change is, the context. It may be good to explore and test and experiment with some of those what if we things, right? You want to discuss suggestions, right? But give some clear expectations around what's possible, what's not. If you're on that side, put forth, if you're on the bargaining side, not the one facilitating the change, but the one receiving it, and you find yourself in this place, put forth your ideas, but do them with some backing behind them, right? Not just because I don't like it, right? Not just because I don't like it, but why should we just do this one little piece instead of this big piece? Maybe you have some ways for efficiency to save money, to save time that the people making the change didn't know. They didn't think about it because they don't have the vantage point that you have. So this is a time for discussion, right? If It depends on the scope. It just depends on the context, the urgency around the change, of course. But if that is appropriate, then explore in that conversation and see if there is some elements that might actually be good to keep. But be open to it if there are elements that they are not able to keep. Now, when we get to that depression piece, remember this could be morale, productivity, energy, all of that. This is really a time for feedback and motivation. It's really a time for enhancing learning opportunities. A lot of times that depression is there because we have a learning curve and it's something new we got to adapt to. And so are there spaces to add in learning, to add in opportunities for feedback, motivation? I remember a great example of this at a software company we were working with. They knew that there was going to be a new rollout of a big way of working for them, for the development team. They knew they were going to have to roll it out. They knew that it would take some time and it would really depress their productivity because people had to learn this new way, this new software, all of that. And so they were intentional about the rollout. They looked at their calendar and all the work that they had to do and said, when would be our quote unquote slow season? And they waited to roll it out then. And they built in a lot of opportunities for like team learning projects. And they even built some gamification in to encourage people to play with the tool a little bit and learn it. They did some hackathons with the new tool and all this to see who could figure out how to use this new piece of it the quickest. And they really created an environment that although people were a bit overwhelmed and needing to really shift their whole way of working, they created space for it, right? For people to not walk into that feeling like they were going to fail, but feeling like there was space for them to learn, space for them to figure it out, space for them to do that together. And it was a very successful transition of that new kind of tool software they were using because of how they planned for it. So as much as possible, sometimes change is unpredictable. We can't plan for it. But in this time, it's really for the learning opportunities, the feedback, the motivation. We're revisiting, we're celebrating whatever quick wins are emerging to support that we are indeed going in the right direction. And then once people have gotten to that acceptance point, we want to reinforce the why, the objectives, the strategy, and also celebrate those quick wins again. Because just as we get to acceptance, things could start going downhill and people can go back and say, see, this is why we shouldn't have done this in the first place. So you can't rest on the laurels yet until it's fully integrated, right? Until it's fully integrated. So that's just a couple of tips and tools as we navigate change. It's expected to have some resistance, both internally and from other people. It's expected to have some emotion to this. But as leaders, it's critical, you all, that we learn to navigate and adapt. If we're facilitating, how can we support other people to navigate and adapt? If we're on the receiving side of it, how can we support ourselves and be proactive to ask for what we need, to ask the questions, to share our concerns in ways that will help us get to a place that support the change if we know that we still want to stay in that space. Okay, so I hope this was helpful for you all today. I hope there were a couple of things to help you reflect on how you navigate change, where you might be in a change right now that you're navigating, and what you might do about it to move forward and to really move into an integrated place where you are kind of managing the change and the change is not managing you. Okay. If this was helpful for you, share with a friend. We're on all streaming platforms, including YouTube. So subscribe if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube yet. If you want to connect with us, we're at Black Woman Leading on all platforms, all podcast streaming platforms. You can find us, and woman is singular. We are also at Black Woman Leading on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, all the places you can find us. You want to connect with me personally? I'm at Laura E. Knights. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn is usually the best place to get me. And if you'd like to learn about our work that we do inside of corporations to really develop their leaders, you can visit our corporate site at knightsconsultinggroup.com. We would love to connect with you in any of these ways. And until next time, be well.